I went to college like pretty determined not to be a psychology major. But then I think spring of sophomore year, that late, I took Psych 101 because I just sort of thought I should. And I was, a goner.
You just heard Daniel Willingham from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. Garth and guest host Jane Halonen from the University of West Florida interviewed Daniel as part of the Psych Sessions 2023 East Coast Tour for episode 182 of Psych Sessions, Conversations about Teaching and Stuff.
Colleagues, do you want to learn more about how you can easily integrate learning strategies into your Intro Psych course? Then sign up for a demo of the Intro Psych book, Psychology in Your Life, and W.W. Norton will give you a $25 gift card for your time. Here's why you should consider it. You've probably noticed that after 2 years of remote learning, your students need some extra support in learning how to study, especially in Intro Psych. So what if you could incorporate study skills directly into the content you're already covering in your course? Sarah Grisson, author of Psychology in Your Life, has offered us this integration. Here's what she did. First, she analyzed the learning science research to find 6 learning impact strategies that would be most helpful to college students, and then she synthesized them into the IMPACT model. IMPACT stands for improving, monitoring, practicing, attending, connecting, and thinking deeply. There are impact learning pauses throughout the book that offer study tips and just-in-time learning hacks. And Inquisitive, Norton's award-winning adaptive assessment, also includes questions on the impact strategies and incorporates these learning tips into Inquisitive's answer-specific question feedback. You're going to want to try this demo out, and they're going to give you a $25 gift card. So sign up for the demo of Psychology in Your Life by going to siegel.wwnorton.com/psych sessions. That's Siegel, like the bird, SEAGULL.wwnorton.com/psych sessions. The Psych Sessions podcast is sponsored by STP. That is the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. That's APA Division 2. You can find them at teachpsych.org. The views or product endorsements expressed do not represent the views, support, or endorsements of STP. Psych Sessions is so grateful to have STP as a long-term supporter. Hi, everybody. This is Garth, and I am here with Jane Halonen. Jane, we talked about this afterwards, how much fun this interview was. Can you just give us your take? Dan Willingham.
Dan Willingham is a very interesting example of the best kind of academic you can have in a Research One institution, since he genuinely cares about helping students and faculty do better work. In preparing for the interview, I did read Outsmart Your Brain and absolutely fell in love with how clear and engaging his writing was. And frankly, I'm going to be making some changes after 42 years of teaching. I'm going to be making some changes in how I orient students to what we do in the classroom as a result of his very good writing. So it was just a pleasure to talk with him.
Yeah, very student-focused book that he just put out. So folks, check that out. Also follow him on Twitter. He puts out great content on Twitter, and you're going to enjoy this interview. He's so personable. I love when he lights up and just starts talking about teaching and the things that excite him. And so we're going to send you over to this interview. Folks, this is Dan Willingham from the University of Virginia. We've been doing this podcast for over 5, 6, almost 6 years or something like that. My podcast partner, Eric Landrum from Boise State University, and I started this. And you have been on our, what I call, I think a hit list in the best possible way. You have been on my hit list forever. And I figured after the pandemic, it's going to be a Zoom thing. When I reach out to him, obviously, because we used to do everything face to face. We'd get people at conferences and stuff, but I'm just so happy to be here in person. And it's Juneteenth There's no one around, but you're still working, so that says something. And I just want to say thanks for taking the time today.
Oh, thanks for coming to see me.
Yeah,
my pleasure to host you.
Perfect. Jane, I'm just going to ask you, how do you know of Dan?
Well, having taught at James Madison, I sort of paid attention to who was at UVA, so I knew of his existence over here. But I have to say the most recent exposure was Outsmarting Your Brain, which is the book that Dan most recently published, and I absolutely love it. So I've become a big fan.
Yeah, you finished it on the flight out.
I did.
Yeah, we were talking, Dan, we were talking maybe a week ago. And you said, did you know Dan put out a new book? And you must have just released it then.
January.
In January. Yeah. Okay. And so I purchased it immediately and started reading it. And for folks, I'll tell you what our impressions, maybe we can talk about our impressions and then you can tell us about what you thought.
What I thought the book was.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sounds good.
So these are bite-size. I'm going to get it wrong, but they're bite-sized chapters, right? Many of them. How many are in there? How many are?
Well, there are 14 chapters, and then each chapter has a little bit of science at the front end, and then tips. And so it's all about studying. And so there are 94 tips in total.
So that's what I loved. I loved the tips. I loved the balance of the science with the practical tips. I thought it was super accessible for students. Jane, what did you think?
I liked how personable the writing was. That I think when you're trying to write for students, it really takes a knack to be able to go, here's the distance between me and the student, and I know how to bridge that gap. And I thought you did that especially well. I think the other thing that made me in awe of the book is I've been teaching for a long time, and it made me rethink what I do on my orientation day in class. And should I be reorganizing my syllabus in a way that would help students who seriously want to understand why they're there? Just even the idea about having students focus on their personal goals. I don't think I've ever actually said to students, what is your goal in this class? I've asked them lots of information, but there were just pieces that filled in some gaps that I didn't know I had. And that's humbling after teaching for 43 years. But I thought it was a great book.
I
What prompted you to write the book at this point in your journey?
So there was a very distinct episode. I'm collaborating with Angela Duckworth at Penn, Ethan Cross at Michigan, and John Janitas at Michigan on a project where we're creating curricula for high school students, one curriculum for self-regulation of emotion and one curriculum for self-regulation regarding study skills, some of what's in the book. And the way this has been an enormously rewarding project, and it's been very long-term. I think we started in like 2018 or something. So early on, the way we started was Angela, of course, has amazing contacts in education throughout the world and throughout the country, especially. And she got some master teachers, about 24 master teachers together. And the idea is that we would teach them the content for these two areas, and then they would write lesson plans. So we had a couple of days where we were teaching teachers this information. And Angela, after a week or two, I got a call from Angela, and she said that so the teachers thought the sessions were really good and they really benefited from them. And they got it, but they would love to have something written that, to refer to as they're working on these lesson plans and figuring out how they're going to communicate this to high school students. So what's the best book out there that covers this sort of content? So I was like, okay, there's a million books about studying. And I didn't like any of them that much. And so I thought, they're all right, Dan. If you think they're, that you could do better, why don't you try? So that was what prompted me to write the book.
When did you start the project? During the pandemic?
No, it was before the pandemic. It's sad. Like things get fuzzy in my mind now about exactly when all this happened. But yeah, no, it was a long process because I didn't, or better put, it was a somewhat long process, but then also the book was like done for a long time before it came out because I didn't know how long it was going to take me to write. So I didn't want to write a proposal and then, because I knew once I had a contract, they were going to want the book in, 6 months or a year maximum. So I wanted to be happy with the book. So first I wrote the book, then I wrote a proposal, then, like the whole process of shopping and then like working with the editor at the publishing house and all that. Then the pandemic happened and all of the supply chain issues and all that. So it was definitely one of those things that were like, by the time the book came out, I'd kind of half forgotten about it and didn't really care anymore. But then I did get excited again, of course, when it actually came out.
Man. Yeah. I don't know if it's the publishers or if it's your personal relationships, but the endorsements on your book are unbelievable. That group of people and that they would all read your stuff and then put their names behind it and say, this is a wonderful book, and wonderful for students and a contribution to what we're doing. So folks, go check out that book and read all those endorsements. I was just so impressed. I
was too. I mean, honestly, I was like a little kid, just like
you should have been
screaming and crying to my wife. You won't believe it. She's like, I don't know who that is, but I'm really happy for you. Right?
Do you know most of those folks personally?
To varying degrees. Yeah. I mean, all of them. I know. Yes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I was really excited for you anyway.
Yeah,
so that's
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
just so great.
When you entered college, the book, one of the charms of the book is the number of times you talk about the ways that you messed up in trying to understand academic life. I'm wondering your background. Where did your motivation to succeed in college come from? Did you come from a family where college was assumed, or are you first generation yourself? Would that help explain why you're so good at communicating things to first gen?
I very much came from a family where college was assumed and where education was, far and away the most important thing. And lots of other things could go, but education was absolutely primary. Now, that said, so my parents were, of course, super supportive. They weren't always knowledgeable. And I think through, they sort of were through college. And I don't talk about this that much, because, I know it's only my personal experience and I know I'm swimming upstream from what a lot of people think. But in my personal experience, although my parents were very interested, they did not communicate a whole lot of useful information, like the hidden curriculum. Mm-hmm. I had to figure out the hidden curriculum because my parents' information was, first of all, my mother was from Eastern Europe and had come here much later after the war. And my father did go to college in the States. He went to Georgia Tech. He was an engineer who decided he didn't want to be an engineer. So his situation was complicated. And then even more surprising, they both went to graduate school in psychology.
Really?
Yes. And again, they had no use for the one thing that was really useful to me was they communicated how frighteningly hard graduate school is. That was the stories I heard over and over again was how hard they had worked in graduate school.
Not exactly an incentive.
No, well, it was very good preparation. Mm-hmm. It may not have been an incentive, but it was very good preparation because I was very daunted going into it.
Where did you grow up?
A number of different places. I did middle school and high school in New Jersey.
In New Jersey. Okay. And so did you apply to a lot of colleges? Did you at least get that information from high school counselors or parents that you should probably throw your net widely? And
no, I think I don't know anybody who applied to a lot because but one of the things, first of all, it just wasn't a thing. Mm-hmm. Second of all, and I think part of the reason it wasn't a thing was that, admission rates weren't as crazy as they are now. It was just you had much more rational reason to think you were probably going to get in somewhere if you applied to 5 and I think that's how many I applied to. Everyone said you have a safety or 2, so to make sure you've got somewhere to go, someplace you feel pretty good about. But also, there weren't even word processors. We were on typewriters, right? And you had to do each one. And Yeah, and a lot of them had different essays, so it was like a significant amount of work. So I think that was if someone said to me, you should apply to 12, I would have been like, get out of here. Like, there's no way I'm doing that.
Well, you opened the door, because I'll tell you what, I couldn't probably on a Twitter, and I haven't looked that much into like, how old is Dan Willingham? But on Twitter, and I couldn't ever really place your age. But now hearing you talk, like, what year did you graduate high school?
Well, what do you want to guess? No, I don't. I actually don't. I don't want you to guess.
No.
That's fine. 1979, I graduated high school.
Okay, 1979.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense. With the word process.
I'm 62.
Okay.
No, that doesn't seem.
Yeah. Sorry. Not a day over. Okay.
Right.
All right. So then you end up going for your undergraduate degree. Where did you end up going?
At Duke.
At Duke. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And did you know that you were going to be were you a psych major?
No, I did not. I mean, because my parents were both psychologists. My uncle was a psychologist as well. He was at University of South Carolina for much of his career. My parents met in a course that he taught at University of Tennessee.
That's quaint.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know if that's a meet cute or what it is. But anyway, so I went to college like pretty determined not to be a psychology major. But then I think spring of sophomore year, that late, I took Psych 101 because I just sort of thought I should. And I was, a goner.
Was it a well-taught course? Or
it was taught by Greg Kimball.
Oh.
Yeah.
He's a legend.
He's a legend. And for those who are listening who don't know who he was, in addition to being a great psychologist, and his era was very much a sort of verbal learning, verbal behavior / behaviorist era. And one of his great achievements was writing the second edition of Hilgard and Marquis' great book on conditioning. He was selected to write the second edition of that. And he also wrote an intro textbook. And so he had thought quite a lot about what an intro course should look like and so on. So I definitely benefited from having a wonderful introductory course.
Does any of your own teaching style reflect how you learned about teaching from Dr. Kimball's class?
Kimball? No. I mean, I don't remember. And, I certainly wasn't processing it that way, right? I wasn't sort of like, if I could have, which I doubt I could have, I wasn't thinking like, let me see how he's doing this. Mm-hmm. I was very much just sort of
just trying to take notes, keeping up.
And honestly, mm-hmm. Right. That's what I was probably doing.
Were there topics that really grabbed you? It sounded like you said you were gone.
Cognition really did.
It did right from the beginning.
Yeah, right from the beginning. And then I was very fortunate to take Introduction to Cognitive Psychology with Ruth Day, who's also just legendary at Duke, just a brilliant instructor. You would come in and she would say, today I'm going to teach you how to crack a safe. Everyone's like, what the hell? I mean, who is that? Right? So, yeah, she was, and, she just had a million tricks up her sleeve.
How did that lesson go?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I just remember what the lead was.
It's the hook, yeah.
I think it was about information theory is what it ended up being about.
I see. Yeah. I see. So you're just going along in your life. Before that spring semester in your sophomore year, what were you thinking? Just undeclared major?
I was an English major. I ended up being that was my second major. And Greg Kimball was an English major as well, and as well as B.F. Skinner. Greg was the one who pointed out to me, there are a lot of us, because it's human behavior from the humanities side, human behavior from the scientific side.
Does writing come easily to you?
I wouldn't say it comes easily to me, but I would say I enjoy the process, or I appear to enjoy the process more than most people. Certainly I complain less than most people about writing.
Do you have a writing schedule when you're in it?
No.
Okay. You write when you have free time? Or when you
I try to make time I try and prioritize it because, it's one of those tasks that it can always be pushed aside in favor of other things that have a deadline.
So tell me if this is too romantic, but you're going along and then you hit this Psych 101 class and everything just turns for you. This cognition content really pulls at you, and now you're just on the path. Is that it at that point in time?
No, not quite, because I was still sort of on the path in my English major, which was funny because I really wasn't very good at it. And I'm not very good with that type of abstract thinking. Scott Fitzgerald describes one of his characters as smart, but he really wouldn't recognize an idea unless it was concrete enough that he could stub his toe on it. And I thought, that's pretty apt for me, actually. So even though I consistently got my lowest grades in English, I did enjoy writing, and I took courses in prose fiction that meant a lot to me. And so I was a little undecided. I semi-seriously considered getting an MFA. And then the one thing I knew is that I didn't want to go straight to graduate school, whatever it was going to be. So I went to Washington, D.C. and worked for a year.
In what capacity?
That was also funny. I ended up having a job that so many of my peers at Duke would have killed for. I was working in a congressional office. And again, it was like a completely ridiculous fit because I didn't really understand the process. I wasn't terribly interested. And I was on the sort of bottom rung. I was a receptionist. Basically, I was answering phones and filing and doing all that sort of thing. But I was there in the nerve center. And in fact, the congressman who I was working for was a congressman from North Carolina, and he decided to run for governor. And so the person who had been his press secretary in the congressional office was now going to go to North Carolina and work for the campaign. So they asked me if I wanted to be the press secretary. Right. And so for which sounds insane. And,
yes, it does sound insane.
It was. But at the same time, like, this was something I really respected about this office was like, they believe strongly in bringing up young people. Mm-hmm. And they were like, you'll be in close touch with this person and he's going to bring you along and show you the ropes. And, but I turned them down because by that time I had applied to graduate school and I said, it doesn't make it'd be fun for me to do this until September and try and figure it out. But yeah, it wouldn't make any sense.
So just let's play a fun game. But if you would have taken that job and enjoyed it, would it have been, is that a pathway to a life of politics then at that point? Is that how? I
mean, that was for a lot of people, that would have been very appealing, right? But it just didn't make any sense for me.
Now, who guided you to DC to take that job for your year?
I needed some place to live, and I was applying everywhere. I was applying all in Congress, and I was applying in all nonprofits. I mean, anywhere. And it just, that one happened to work out. I showed up literally every day because they said, we'll contact you. And this was before cell phones. This is 1983. And so I said, well, you can't contact me because I'm couch surfing. So I don't really have a phone, but I'll just check in. And so I kept showing up every day saying, just want you to know, I'm still really interested. I haven't found anything else. And the guy was the head of the office was very pleasant. And I guess eventually thought, look at this son of a bitch is going to show up every day. We may as well put him to work.
Well, there is something about demonstrating your persistence.
Well, that was in my head. That's what I was doing.
Well, who taught you to be persistent? We know you want to reach every student in your course, to help every student individually succeed. But how do you find out what each student wants and needs? Macmillan Learning's Achieve for Psychology offers a solution. Ask them. Achieve puts goal setting and reflection surveys in each course, where students share their aspirations, thoughts, and concerns about what they are trying to learn. Their responses help you tailor lessons and assignments and addresses both individual and class-wide needs. See for yourself. Go to macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions for an introductory tour today. Macmillan's Achieve for Psychology, engaging every student, supporting every instructor, setting the new standard for teaching and learning. If that's a fair question.
Yeah, it's fair. I couldn't, I don't know.
Was it modeled for you?
I mean, I suppose so. Yeah. I mean, sure. My parents were persistent in things they undertook, but I never thought of, like that was like a core value in our house.
Well, I really see, as we do, a lot of students, and the obviously it's a different generation now than it maybe was, but does that exist out there? I in my nieces and nephews, I'm not sure, even though they're great people and they're going to go on to do good things, but there is that that advocating for yourself that I think is just hard for students these days to be really confident about what skills they have or what they want to do and advocate for themselves in that way. I don't know.
I will not tell you stories about my children, but I will just tell you I absolutely see it in my children.
You see that quality of you?
I see it. Well, I see what you were saying. I wonder if you see that today. I see it at home for sure.
And do you think that
once we're off mic, I'll tell you stories about kids. But
fair enough.
You don't need to hear it. Your audience doesn't need to hear it. My kids definitely don't need to hear me telling stories about.
Oh, but they're going to want to know if they listen to this tape what you said off tape.
Yep.
They will.
They know.
Yeah. The kinds of contributions that you've made to the psychology teaching community, beyond the book that you just recently published, you've had a huge impact on the way educators think about practical science and what science says about learning and how that should be applied. One of the things that you're kind of have a strong reputation for is dissing learning styles.
Yeah.
Can you talk about when did you come to the awareness that this was
an issue?
Yeah, a pseudoscience.
Yeah, and
almost.
again, there's a very particular incident. So I was early on. I had a lot of contact with the Core Knowledge Foundation here in town, which for those in the audience who don't know about it, it's a nonprofit. Educational nonprofit that produces curricula and other materials for K-12 education here in Charlottesville. And it's the head of it is E.D. Hirsch. And he, more than any other single individual, is responsible for me getting interested in education. So I was giving a talk at one of their conferences. So I'm in front of, 25 teachers or something. I don't remember what I was talking about, but, I had one slide where I mentioned learning styles, and it was an example of some other point I was making. But the key thing is that I assumed everyone in the audience knew that there was no scientific evidence for learning styles. And so I just sort of used that as an example in passing. And everybody was enjoying the talk, and I could feel the atmosphere change. And then someone said, wait, put up their hands. Like, could you go back a slide? And they weren't mad, but they were like extremely puzzled. And then in future talks, I encountered more people who actually get very offended. But that was probably, early 2000s or something like that. And then I realized by that time I was writing for the American Educator, which is a quarterly magazine that the American Federation of Teachers, the teachers union, produces. And it goes out to all the teachers who are in the union. So I pitched to my editor, I should write something about learning styles. So I did, and I kind of thought I was done and didn't really want to write about it anymore. And then literally, I think every other time I've written about it, it's because an editor has asked me to write about it. And I have said, I don't want to write about this anymore. I'm really tired of it. And then they sort of prevail upon me and say, like, but it's so important. I know our readers are still think that there is scientific evidence for learning styles and so on. The one exception to that is when my editor at the New York Times asked me to write about it. I didn't protest. I said, fine.
Yeah.
So for folks, our audience is, most of our audience understands that learning styles is a myth. I don't know if there's a better word than myth for it, but can you just summarize for us really quickly and for our audience, if they're talking to students about learning styles, because students are coming in from high school still thinking about that.
What their learning style is.
Yep. How would you explain it succinctly to students?
I think the most common reason that students think that it's self-evident to them that there's learning styles, is that they're confusing ability with style. And so when they say I'm a visual learner, what they really mean is my visual memory seems to be pretty good. And so what I point out is no one questions whether there are differences in abilities across people. There's no doubt. Some people have better visual imagery capabilities. Some people, catch on to different. That's not controversial at all. But style is supposed to mean something different than ability, or we just call it ability. And so I think the best way for them to understand that distinction, because that sounds confusing, is through a sports analogy, because we're used to the idea of athletes having different styles of play. So you can have two basketball players who are equal in ability, but one has a very aggressive style of play, and the other's very conservative in the shots they take. So that's what style is. Not how well you do something; it's the way that you prefer to do it. So for learning styles to be meaningful, it's not that you are especially good in visual memory. It's that that's the way you prefer to do things, and things just sort of go better when you do things visually, and that implies that there are different ways that you can take on different tasks. So a task, you can do it visually if you want to. You can do it auditorily. You can do it kinesthetically. You prefer to do it auditorily. I prefer to do it visually. So that then implies that there's this flexibility. So we could test that in the laboratory. And I just ask you to do something that's consistent with your style versus something that's inconsistent with your style. And you should do better when it's consistent with your style. Just as a player who likes to be conservative, if you ask them to be the aggressive hot dog player, they won't do as well, right? They're still good, but they won't be, right? And so then the students can understand, that's how you would test it. That all makes sense. And I say, that's what's been done. And the idea sounds like it would make sense. It just doesn't pan out.
Yeah, it seems to have a lot of intuitive appeal.
Yeah. To
be able to credit or blame different outcomes based on your preference. But I've been really struck that this is a really hardy framework for colleges of education. Mm-hmm. That it just doesn't seem to go away. And if those folks are headed into teaching at elementary and high school, then of course we get students who come believing this is gospel and expecting that if I say, what do you need from me to help you learn? And I get back, I'm a kinesthetic learner, so could you please do X, Y, and Z? It's like, oh dear. That really shapes what their expectations are going to be about class experience.
I'm gonna push back. This is obviously not the right position, but why are we, like, in teaching of psychology world? This is a big topic, has been for a number of years, and I think people really want their students to get this and know this, and I wonder to what end. Is it because it's a really good example of how psychological science can kind of pull back the curtains on myth or something like that? Is that why we like it? Or is it doing some harm to students to carry that forward, that I am a kinesthetic learner, or I am a visual learner? What is the harm of such a misconception that this is actually how it is?
Yeah, why are we so irked by it?
Because people are super irked by it, and I don't quite understand the emotion behind it. But I don't know. What do y'all think?
Well, let me give you the irked example. I'm aware of a high school teacher who went to an in-service on learning styles, and it was introduced by the principal how important this was because it's going to shape how students learn. And the psychology teacher protested and got fired.
Oh.
And so here is someone advocating for what science says that gets rejected by his employer, and that's the loss of a pretty good teacher. So I think that's an example of why we're likely to see some passion on the part of psych people.
Yeah, and I see that in higher education, where it's the next thing that's coming down the pipeline, and we're all going to adopt it because it's the next greatest thing. Steve Chu just gave a talk at was it at SEPA that he gave this talk, and
Yes.
and one of his points was these things just come around again and again and again. You can almost track them, but everybody, and I think that was learning strategy. So this works, but not to take these things. I think it's the binary nature of it, right? It's like, this is the thing that now works, and it's the wrong question to ask. We're trying to understand these very complicated, the answers to these very complicated questions, or the complicated answers to these very simple questions. Maybe that's it. But do you think it does harm to students to carry forward learning styles? I mean, obviously it did harm to this teacher.
Yeah. I mean, I think on occasion, David Kramer had a really nice demonstration that there are people who think they know what their learning style is and actually try and learn in accordance with their learning style, including at moments where it harms their performance. Yeah. So in principle, it could. I mean, I do think there seems to be a lot of energy, more energy than is probably merited, firing away at learning styles. Sure. And I think part of it is like, for us in our profession, it's like, it's like, I have a contribution to make here. This is like an easy to understand place where what I know is relevant. And it's kind of crazy that this is still a thing. I think it's so self-perpetuating because something like 90% of people believe it. And this is, what I always point out is it's become one of those things that they know. And you don't if someone asks me, Dan, how do you really know atomic theory is right? It's not like, oh, well, I checked up and read all. It's just like, everyone knows it's right. What are you talking about? Right. And I think learning styles has attained that sort of status. So I think it's going to be pretty challenging to undo.
Yeah. I guess that is the harm, is if a student is believing that they only have this narrow ability to learn in this one way, then they are missing all these other ways of learning. And, it reminds me of, Carol Dweck's work about growth mindset. It seems to me like this would be an example of fixed mindset, where I just don't see myself as able to do these other things because I'm programmed this way, or whatever it is.
Well, I think then if you also throw in, maybe some privilege or some entitlement issues, with students coming through to college classrooms and then expecting teachers to accommodate your learning style, that's a problem.
Yeah. I heard you say that a few minutes ago, and I think I would push back on that. But it's a great learning opportunity for a student, right? A great conversation opportunity. I do love myths as a way of approaching teaching psychology to students. And I think lots of people have written about it and done great jobs. But I think this is just one of those, there are so many realities about psychology, so many truths of psychology that you could bring to students' attention just through this one myth, right? Yeah. So
I'm curious if there are classes that you especially love to teach, or do you have a subset of classes that are standard that you tend to teach every semester? Are we talking about at the grad level, undergrad level? Where do you do most of your teaching energy?
It's split, grad and undergrad. So a typical load at UVA, we're on semesters. A typical load will be a so-called service course, which means sort of a 2000 level sophomore kind of course. And then a senior seminar, and then one graduate course. And the courses that I've taught have, it tends to be, I think, like most people, like you have a set that you do for a while and then you swap one out and that sort of thing. So,
do you have a favorite?
I don't really. I enjoy them all for different reasons.
And what do you do if you get the senior seminar assignment? What's the nature of that?
So I hadn't taught one of those for a while because there were other courses for which there was a greater need. But a couple of years ago, I started teaching a course in high-level cognition, which I've very much enjoyed.
Tell me about that course. High-level cognition. So not my area.
Deep understanding, reasoning, decision-making, problem-solving, and creativity. And what I enjoy about it is, they're seniors, and so it's an opportunity to read primary literature. And it's a small enough class that I can do. Many of our classes at University of Virginia are pretty big. So my intro to cognition class typically has 350 students. This is still kind of big for a seminar. I usually have 22, 24, something like that. What I had them do was they had to undertake a project that they would work on for 10 of the 13 weeks of the semester that was anything they were had always been interested in doing that required some of the high-level cognitive processes that I mentioned. So someone said they wanted to improve their chess game and worked on that. Somebody wanted to figure out how to live separately from the capitalist system that's in the U.S., but still participate socially and other ways. They just wanted to remove themselves economically. So, which I found very interesting. And she found it much harder than she thought it was going to be to work this out. I'm trying to think of one more interesting example of projects that students picked. someone got a neighbor to show up with 3 surprise ingredients each week, and she had to bake something so that she was going to be more flexible in her baking. Right? So they have to journal. So they do this for a minimum of 2 hours a week, and they have to journal about it, and they have to introspect. They have to be, late 19th century German psychologists and watch their own thought processes. And then there are some other short writing assignments, but the introspections point to, towards the end of the semester, their final paper, they have to use the literature that we've been reading all semester to sort of deal with one of the theories, then treat themselves as a case study. And talk about how their introspections bear on the different theories that we've read and that are relevant.
I'd like to take that class.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah. Halfway through, and people can't see this, but halfway through Dan explaining this to us, Jane and I just looked at each other, and just with that look of, we should be doing this. Yeah. We should be doing this. Or we're jealous. I don't know if I want to teach the class or be in the class, one of the two.
It's great fun. And the students do say it's a lot of work, but most of we were talking about student evaluations. The evaluations that I get say that students enjoy it.
Before we move on, because I know that Jane wants to talk a little bit about that, but in that course, how are you using class time when you're all in the class together? Are you reading things in class together? Is it discussion based?
It's discussion based, yeah. But we, because there are not that many classes. Again, I wish that students had a chance to take more seminars here. They don't have that many. And so that's why the course is very writing intensive, because they don't have that many chances to get someone to give them feedback on their writing and to, hear their own voice and hear that of their fellow students and so on. One of the things that I think they really enjoy towards the end of the semester, as they're sort of moving towards their final paper, everybody makes a video, 5 minutes or so, and then they all watch the videos at home. And it's sort of, here's what I'm thinking my paper is going to be about. Here's what most of my introspections were like. Here are the things that were sort of consistent themes. Here's how I'm thinking about putting them together. And then in class, we all get together. We've all watched your video and your description, and we sort of try and help you shape your paper and make your paper better before you've written it. We know where you think it's going. And several students have said to me, I do very little of that, where it's like, we're colleagues, like we're trying to help you out and make your paper better and bring our ideas and insights from the course to the work that you're doing. So I think that's a great thing for, students who are like getting pretty far along in the major to have an opportunity to do that.
For that final paper, are they taking kind of the breadth of everything that you covered throughout the semester and pulling that into the final paper? Or are they choosing really one theory. I think you mentioned theories
before. The latter, yeah. So it's much more like, not everything is a comfortable fit, right? You had these introspections. They don't apply to everything that we talked about all semester. It's the latter.
You're right. So I imagine that the person who was doing the 3-ingredient thing, that's actually a dream of mine. I would love that. But that 3-ingredient idea would probably choose a creativity, psychological theory from creativity. Or
I actually don't remember what you did.
Okay.
Yeah, it could have been problem solving. Mm-hmm. It could have been decision making.
Oh, sure,
right?
Yeah, of course. Okay. All right, Jane. I'm releasing you. Let's talk about assessment or
student
evaluations.
Well, we had a prior conversation before we got recording about how students might be responding to you. What do students say about you as a teacher? And I was a little surprised that you said, I don't know. It's like, you don't know. And so I wanted to ask that again. How is it you've been teaching a long time and you wouldn't know what your reputation might be, what students say about you behind your back? And so I wanted to give you a chance to say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said, it's behind my back, and so I think I get very limited information. I think it's what I learn is, in addition, is there's a aspect of presentation about it, whether they know I'm going to read it or they know their peers are going to read it. It was not written for the purpose to which I would put it. And so there's an active interpretation there. But I also think it's, that's a problem, but I don't think that's an insoluble problem.
Correct.
But I also think it's probably better for me if I proceed on the assumption that I don't really know. Now, that said, like if I see a consistent concern in my anonymous evaluations, my response is not, well, who knows? I don't know what they're thinking. Like I think if there's a complaint, that's legitimate. But more broadly, sort of what's my reputation, or like what do students really think? I'm more comfortable figuring I probably don't know. And because especially when it comes to graduate students, I think graduate students are highly motivated to act as though everything is just fine. I'll tell one brief story. Sure. This is a while ago. I was talking with some graduate students and a couple of professors about how do you know, or what do you do if your advisor wants you to work on a project you don't really want to work on? And the graduate students were talking about that, and I was talking about that. And then one of the faculty members, we were like, so what do you think about that? And this faculty member said, that would never happen in my lab because we just have very open communication, and they would tell me. Yeah, and I just thought that was crazy. I mean, to believe that just didn't make any sense to me. So I think I'm basically saying that only writ large. I think you're much better off saying, I really should assure myself. Obviously, you can end up badgering the students or being like, are you really happy? No, really, are you happy? Yeah. Love me, right? Where you're sort of pleading with the student to affirm what you're doing. But, there's some balance to be struck. But I think, assuming everything is going great, I think is not way to go either.
I think it leaves you with the stance that you're assuming things are going well. And if there are serious challenges, you'd probably end up with some feedback, whether it's informal or whether it comes through on teaching evaluations, to be able to take some action to be corrective. But the reason that I raised that question is recently some faculty have brought to my attention that the absence from classes in COVID seemed to make student evaluations crankier and pricklier. And so where students were mildly unhappy before, now they're just really nasty. And so whether they've lost some socialized ability to be able to communicate something constructively, and then of course it depends on how the process is presented. If it's kind of pro forma and students see it as valueless and they don't care who reads it, and they treetop whatever they're doing in their numerical evaluations. But especially this last round of evaluations, a dear friend of mine, brilliant teacher, but who normally always had these glowing teaching evaluations, just got hammered by one or two students, and it absolutely undid her. And so trying to figure out, I didn't do anything different from what I've done in past. What did I do? Was it me? Was it COVID? Was it what's going on? And more people concerned about how their evaluations would be perceived by administration. And so it's an area that I find fascinating.
Yeah. And there's, at my institution, so many conversations about the validity of the instruments that we're using, the questions that we're asking. And I think maybe that's kind of what we're talking about is what are we measuring, and should we be making decisions based on any of this? But I think there's the human side of, I remember when, what's it called? The online one that I hate? Not Rotten Tomatoes. That's for movies. Rate My Professor. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I remember reading that early on and just being gutted. But then also not seeing that at all on my end of term evaluations, which, now granted, those end of term evaluations, all the students who drop the class or whatever, like they're gone.
Yeah,
right?
so you don't have that weight.
There are problems. There's just inherent problems in it. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what we do. I mean, you were a dean.
Yes, I was.
So what's the solution to understanding how instructors are doing in the classroom?
Well, actually, one of the principles that I preach about is that if you have a reasonable relationship with your dean, you need to recognize that deans have been teachers too, and they know that there are people who are outliers in every class. And so if you get a class of students who are mostly happy, and then you get the "she's a dream crusher" kind of comment, you know that's atypical, that something may have gone on in that relationship, but it doesn't really represent who that person is. Yet, because we have a negative evaluation bias, that's what sticks with people, like Velcro, when they read look how wonderful I am over here, but this student thinks X. I wonder why. And it just causes so much suffering. Yeah. But especially if you think your dean is going to respond in an awful way to what's written, that you want administrators who are human and understand that you have a wide variety of personalities in a class. And if everybody likes you, I have to say as a dean, if everybody loved you, I think probably something's wrong.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well put. Yeah.
Dan, did you ever have opportunity to move, or have you ever moved into administrative roles at all, or have you?
I never have. I've there have been discussions about that. The closest I've come is I've been the director of graduate studies within my department, but that's a skill set I really don't have. So I've steered clear of that out of mercy for my colleagues.
Right. Do you see like your path kind of just remaining? You're going to teach your classes. You're going to write books. You're going to work with undergraduate students and graduate students.
I think so.
At this point.
Yeah.
What's coming down the pike for you for as far as other ideas? You said you have another book. I have another book that I'm working on. Yeah, that'll be about thinking. I mean, the teaching the course in high-level cognition was not an accident that I wanted. I've been reading that literature, and so thinking about those issues a lot. So that's what's next up.
Oh, you'll have such good examples from that class to illustrate.
They would be even better if I were more alert to like keeping track of them, I'm afraid. But yeah, I can go back and look at my notes, I hope. And yeah.
Are you always taking notes, thinking about the future, and I may write about this sometime, or?
I try to. I mean, like everybody, I'm not as good at it as I wish I were, but yeah, I try to.
And how do you organize those? Just as I'm always looking to steal from people. So.
You're going to have to look elsewhere. Okay. That's not a forte of mine. I mean, it's better than it used to be, but it's not great. As I said in the book, I mean, I was really a disaster in organization until graduate school. And I mean, like my own schedule, not files and all that. That was bad and remains bad, but there were fewer obvious consequences. I would just miss appointments all over the place. And I told the story in the book about like missing a lab meeting in graduate school. And we were like, my advisor and the lab is meeting in this sort of open air bullpen right outside my door. And I've got my door closed and I'm reading about George Miller or something. I don't know what I was doing, but and they're all like, where's the new guy? So that was when I like decided I really had to get serious.
That was at Harvard.
That was at Harvard.
How was your experience at Harvard? Can you just talk a little bit about just your years there?
Sure. I mean, it was, I loved graduate school as most people do. It's just so, and I knew at the time how lucky I was to just be able to, read all this great stuff and talk to people. And it was so exciting. I just loved it. I had actually started graduate school at University of Minnesota and was there for 2 years and was pretty happy with the program. More than pretty happy. I was very happy with the program. But my wife at the time, Minneapolis was just not a good city for her at all. And so I applied to transfer and ended up at Harvard. So in Minneapolis, my advisor was Mary Jo Nissen, who was a young assistant professor. I think she'd just been there a year or two when I got there. And so she really shaped my thinking and my interests. And then I got to Harvard and I don't know why they admitted me because I wrote about all this stuff I was doing with Mary Jo. Nobody there was doing that. And I was admitted to Bill Estes' lab. And I think I was in Estes' lab because I was at University of Minnesota. And that was where he grew up, right? Both undergrad and grad. So I'm in this mathematical psychology laboratory with all these interests in neuropsychology. So I was like a very uneasy fit. And some of your listeners may know Bill Estes' personality. It was legendary at the time I was there. But if you're not, like in mathematical psychology, you probably wouldn't know. He's extremely reserved, and he was sort of famous for these silences. You would say something, and he wouldn't say anything, and he would just kind of stare at you and you're like, are you contacting the mothership? Like, what is going on while you're staring at me, right? So all of us in the lab were extremely uneasy. And, like you'd go into a meeting and people would come out and it'd be like a debriefing, like, okay, well, what were his eyebrows doing? That kind of thing. But his former students were extremely devoted to him. Everybody just loved him. I think most people, said like, yes, he's hard to warm up to a little bit, or hard to get to know, or a little because his method of interactions. And it is true that he was very, very loyal to his students and his former students. He and I, candidly, like we never developed a warm. Even after I left, it was. We never got on the terms that other former students were able to get to. I spent a lot of time talking to Steve Kostelin when I was at Harvard because his approach to sort of integrating neuroscience and cognitive psychology was the kind of thing I had learned with Mary Jo, and just was much more what I was looking for rather than training mathematical psychology. But I did learn a lot from Bill Estes about data and respect for data and ways of thinking through experimental problems that was really valuable for me. So I had a ball in graduate school. I loved it.
Are there any other people that were influential in your forging the path that you have as a researcher and teacher?
I mean, a lot of people. I mean, another early figure was John Gabrielli, who I talked with a lot. John is now at MIT. And when I was at Harvard, John was, I think by then, he was already a postdoc at MIT. He had done his graduate work there as well. Then he was a postdoc at Harvard for a while. And he's just a brilliant psychologist and neuropsychologist. And so I spent a lot of time talking with him, and I was very influenced by him. And he actually was the one who suggested what the topic of my dissertation should be. So just sort of in an offhand comment. So he was a very important figure for me and remains one.
From Harvard, you come directly to University of Virginia? No.
I taught at Williams College for 2 years.
Okay. And that was not a long-term career choice for you?
Again, it was personal reasons more than anything else. Okay. I mentioned my wife had a hard time in Minneapolis, and then we were in Boston. She's in publishing, and so Boston is, of course, a great town for publishing. Williamstown, Massachusetts is not. And so we had a little baby, and it was, it was pretty isolating and pretty challenging for her. And I liked Williams fine. And but, and I maybe would have just stayed out of inertia or whatever. I love, my colleagues were great. There wasn't a graduate program there. And that I sort of missed that. So anyway, that was why I applied around for jobs and ended up at the University of Minnesota. University of Virginia.
Yeah, now the University of Virginia.
Yeah.
You've been here for a while.
Yeah, since 92.
92. Can you just tell us how many books have you written now? And just a few, right? Like 4 or 5?
I've written 5 popular press books.
Popular press books. Okay.
I co-edited 1 volume, and I have a textbook that's gone through 4 editions.
What's the textbook?
It's Cognition.
Mm-hmm.
And my co-author is Cedar Reiner, and we're working on the 5th edition now.
Well, folks, check that out. Check out that book, and especially Dan's new book, which is called Jane, because I can't remember.
Outsmarting Your Brain.
Outsmart Your Brain. It's a great title.
It is.
Don't remember it right now. It's a memorable title.
So memorable. Absolutely. Yeah.
Dan, sometimes we ask guests if there's anything else that they want to talk about, anything that we didn't get to that was important, anybody that they want to
especially
recognize.
Considering teaching audiences.
Yeah, in particular.
If you were to be put in a position of giving advice to someone who's just starting out in higher education now in 2023, is there anything in particular you would highlight for them to be aware of?
Yeah. That's a great question. So some of the graduate courses I've taught at UVA over the years have been directed at kind of hidden curriculum type things. So very early when I was here, I ran a professional issues course for graduate students about writing grants and all that. More recently, I've been teaching a course on how to give a good job talk. And there's usually just like 2 or 3 students in the course, right? It's like, it's advanced graduate students. And so I think those kinds of things are important. And that's related to the advice I would give to someone who's just starting out, which is, it's okay that you don't really know how to do this because you haven't gotten very much instruction in it. And people know that, like we've all been there. And so don't feel like it needs to be, or anyone expects it to be great the first time around. Like if you're not better 10 years from now than you are this first year, like God help you, right? Everyone expects that there's going to be a learning curve. But for learning to happen, you need feedback and you need coaching. And so ask questions. And, there's some people who probably won't want to help you because that's not going to help their career. But there'll be someone, at least one person who's eager to help you and will come and observe your teaching and provide feedback and give you ideas, and you'll benefit so much from that person. So don't be shy about looking for them.
I think that's great advice.
I'm going to ask another question that just came up for me that I said I'd get back to. Can you tell me about what is your, and I can be more specific if you want, but what is your relationship with Twitter, or how did you decide to engage in Twitter, and what's that looked like over the past number of years?
The way I sort of think of my project, because that I described that moment with all these teachers who thought that learning styles was a thing, and then even more. There was another talk before that, which I've described in Outsmart Your Brain, where I was invited to talk to a bunch of teachers just about cognitive psychology, and I rashly said, sure, that sounds great. You know, like I have an ego just like anybody else. And I'm like, oh, it's so nice to be asked. I'd love to talk to a bunch of teachers. And then I realized, like, what in the world am I going to tell these teachers about learning and attention that they don't already know? And then I ended up being really taken aback when I didn't know what else to talk about. So I just talked about like stuff from an introduction to cognition course that I kind of thought was relevant to K-12 education. And they didn't know any of it. And this is like the stuff that I'm telling freshmen and sophomores in their very first course on learning, right? And so from that point on, like the way I've envisioned sort of what I'm doing in my project is like our field's not done a very good job of communicating this content to educators. And so that's what I wanted to do. And I think Twitter is part of that. Twitter, one, just sort of blasting out, hey, I've got a new article, but also interacting with educators, interacting with other psychologists who have similar sorts of goals. I mean, Twitter is sort of the place where academics hang out among the social media platforms. So that's how I see Twitter.
Has it been supportive? Or I guess probably I'm going for the other side of it, which is Twitter can be kind of a nasty place sometimes. Does that ever come? And you know what? Maybe it doesn't have to be nasty. Maybe it's are there good kind of scientific conversations that happen or challenges of things that you put out there?
For me, it's been overwhelmingly positive. I've met people on Twitter, who I've then met face to face, and I've learned things from people. The nastiness certainly exists, obviously. I will say that if someone is nasty to you and you reply pleasantly, you ignore the fact that they were nasty and you just sort of reply at face value and say, well, I don't see it that way or whatever, 99 times out of 100, they will respond in kind. They'll be pleasant back to you. Yeah. Sometimes they'll apologize. Frequently they don't. But I can think of about 3 people who just sort of, keep after it, keep being nasty. And honestly, I think those people, they've got something going on.
Something else is going on.
Yeah, there's something going on. So
yeah.
Okay, so a follow-up question. When academics are good about writing things that popularize material, that make it more accessible to the public, it seems to me that there can be some blowback from people who don't do that, who are academics, that they see popularizing as some kind of lower status activity. And I wonder if you ever got any grief about the fact that you've been successful in creating accessible material.
I can't think of a time I've gotten grief.
Okay.
Occasionally I've gotten comments that are sort of pretty left-handed compliments. Things like, I saw that it's so good someone's doing that. That sort of made it sound like it's the kind of thing anybody could do. And like, it's nice of you to take it on because it's not very rewarding, work, but like, it's good someone's doing it. That's real, and of course that sticks in my memory, right? So that's why I bring it up. But most people have been very supportive. But as with students, I pretty much assume I don't know what people are saying about me behind my back. So I don't know.
Okay.
Well, I'll say it to your face. I think that you are among our colleagues, the Teaching of Psychology group. You're a great help to us. We take the things that you put out in your books and on Twitter or whatever, and we bring them into our classrooms and talk to students about them. They're very helpful. And I think we all believe, I think at this level of teaching psych, that that psychology should be helpful to people's lives. And so I know that, the way that you're shaking your head right now is that you believe that too. And it's really evident in your work. And now you're helping students with this latest book, and you're going to keep helping teachers too. So, I think we'll leave it there. Is that all right?
It
all
is.
right. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you. Appreciate it.